Hello, I'm Mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and of course, all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which also do not count.
It's funny you say, of course, because I might take issue to your assertion of such. I am Dapper Dan Gavoston. I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, and for me, of course, that means the annuals. So I'm surprised you agree with me, Mark, that the annuals are included in that collection, because I say they definitely count. But I will concede to you, Mark. For me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains purely a fantasy.
Well, when you own everything, like literally everything, Dan, I mean, like those annuals, say, yeah, of course, like they exist, but I mean, counting, no, but right. Anyway, you go on with your intro, sir. I don't want to make. I don't want to pile on here.
Well, welcome everybody to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
And if you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. And of course, leave us a review to help spread the word about our show. And also, if you want to catch up with all of our thoughts about Spider-Man and adjacent Spider-Man stuff that have not showed up in our podcast, you should subscribe to our Substack at amazingspider.substack.com.
Yeah, and this podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going, go to amazingspidertalk.com and consider joining our Patreon. Today, Mark, we're going to do something a little bit different. Normally, we talk about all of the kind of like just generally numbered issues of Amazing Spider-Man, but this is one of those special... Really, it probably should have been a numbered issue of Spider-Man. We are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Gang War First Strike #1. A long title, but an exciting issue that definitely needs to be read for the upcoming Gang War arc. So this issue was written by Zeb Wells with help from Cody Ziglar, I assume on the Miles stuff. The cover artwork is by John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz, and interior artwork is by Joey Vazquez with Julian Shaw, and colors by Bryan Valenza, and of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramanga. This issue was first released on November 29th, 2023, and a special note, it was dedicated to Joey's late mother, Shari Ann Myers. So Mark, why don't you tell us about all the crazy stuff that happened in Gang War First Strike #1?
Sure thing, Dan. Well, last time you told me to shorten the recaps, and then you ended up adding stuff in it after the fact. Well, now I'm just going to go whole hog on a recap here, Dan. So buckle up. It's also a very long issue, so we'll see how long this goes. Anyway. We open on Arthur Avenue, where the Owl is angrily banging his fists on the table, while the Crime Master, Mr. Negative, and others look on. Wait a second, is that Shang-Chi? Oh man, someone is going to have to explain some Marvel status quo-ology to me. You see, all of these gangsters are arguing about territory, which only means one thing: a gang war! Good thing this is a one-shot dedicated exclusively to that purpose. Hammerhead and his girlfriend join the fray, and he immediately gets called out for trying to make a move immediately after Madame Mask gets off. And yeah, Dad and I have been saying this the whole time. It seems curious from the get-go, right? I wonder if that'll get resolved anytime soon. So we move on to Janice Lincoln, and she shows up, and she immediately sits down in her father's empty chair, and the other mobsters are like, that's not how this works. You have to take over a crime territory by paying your dues, like mopping bathroom stalls and such. Honest work. Anyway, Hammerhead is all, thanks again for letting me show up to your wedding and ruining it. And Janice is like, keep Randy's name out of your effing mouth. But before she could slap Hammerhead at an award show, he brings up the fact that Randy going around trying to get superheroes legal again is exactly the kind of thing they all need to be concerned with. So it's decided. Janice is going to kill Randy, and that's that. To brighten the mood, Spider-Man is having a battle with Slide before Miles Morales interjects and slashes Slide with an energy sword. And Spider-Man is like, hey, I didn't know you could do that. Heck, neither did I, Dan. And Miles is like, that's what happens when you ghost folks and or don't read their monthly books all that closely. So Miles reads Peter the Riot Act. He's a bad mentor and friend. You know, all the things Dan is going on about on social media. Spidey is trying to apologize, and Miles tells him actions speak louder, and he should join the movement to get Mayor Luke Cage to reinstate superheroes. Miles then swings off with a final mic drop, leaving Peter stunned, yet deep in thought. Over to Gracie Mansion, and Mayor Cage is talking to Randy about the big protests he's starting about the superhero repeal, while Hammerhead and his girl, gotta keep mentioning that girl, Dan, they drive by. We flash over to Randy in an empty stairwell when Janice shows up. Randy brushes her off, bringing up how her mobster ties ruined his precious wedding day. What a groomzilla. Before Janice slams him against the wall and asks if Randy thinks she's a murderer, like her father. Randy says no, but knows someone put her up to this, and right on cue, Janice backs down in time for a bunch of thugs with guns to show up and open fire, but not before. Okay, Dan, say the magic words.
Look out! I mean, really, look out. Like, at this point, I think this is less about me speculating about lookouts and more like, can we say watch out? Can we say cover your head? Can writers, you need something else besides look out. I'm tired of calling this out, but it's every issue now. It's either a joke from Nick Lowe, who's listening and making fun of me and making it a mandate, or we're just getting lazy. No more lookout, please. I beg you.
All right, before Dan falls apart. So, Spider-Man shows up in Mayor Cage's office, but Cage looks despondent. Spidey wants to talk superhero laws, but Cage ominously suggests, no one told you. Before we flash over to Robbie, sitting by Tombstone's side when a nurse busts in saying, you're okay, we thought you had been shot. Before admitting they got the wrong Robertson. And that's some real Doctor from Arrested Development energy right there, folks. Robbie is off in time to intercept a very bloodied Randy on a gurney, being chased behind by Janice before Robbie tells her to get the hell away from his son. Emotions are running real high right now. That brings us over to Hammerhead and the girlfriend. And the girl doesn't like that he had the kid shot, and Hammerhead gets all domestic abusey about it before rambling on with a Dr. Evil rant, giving the girl enough time to grab a bar and start smashing his head in. Apparently, it's laced with adamantium and magic. And after a pretty bloody beating, Janice comes through the window in time for the girlfriend to reveal that she's been Madam Mask all along. Apparently, I know, right? Shocked. Pretend to be shocked face. Apparently, she went to the same hiring agency that Norman Osborn did back in the day to find a lookalike to get killed by her while playing Hammerhead's girl. And then he told her the entire plan like the idiot that he is, which, for whatever reason, Madam Mask is now doing to Janice. These damn supervillain types just can't help but spill the beans. Janice is still distraught about Randy, but Mask tells her now everyone is going to make a move on Hammerhead's territory, treaties will fail, and chaos will erupt on the streets, leading to a war. You might even call it a gang war, Dan. I know. Back at the hospital, Spider-Man shows up in the window where Robbie sits by Randy's side. Robbie tells Spidey he shouldn't be here. He should be out there fighting for what Randy was fighting for. Spidey shows some doubts he's even able to do the right thing before Robbie lectures him about Randy's cause. He got shot for what he believed in, and that's a tragedy, but it's also a story he might die for. Spidey can't let that story end in vain, so right on cue, an explosion from outside, and Spidey gets ready to swing into action. One last exchange with Janice and Madam Mask. Janice is ready to defend Harlem with her life, and Mask mocks her, saying she'll be there to pick up whatever's left before giving Shotgun a call and confirming that she hired him in the first place. Over to Luke Cage, and Spidey shows up, webs the door shut, and tells him to stay out of the way. Luke says he'll tell the cops to leave him alone, and Spicey tells no, not just him, but the team he's about to put together. And that is our issue, Dan.
We're doing an Ocean's 11. One can only hope.
Let's get the
well,
gang.
Mark, It's been nearly a decade since the last gang war in the pages of these comics in Jerry Conway's 2015 Spiral story. Can you believe it was
Wow.
almost a decade ago? And here we are at the precipice of another one. I dare say none of the previous gang war stories have ever really balanced the citywide scale with the personal stakes for Spider-Man. They tend to land on like one side of that equation, and typically each one kind of hollows out the other. But did this first chapter of this new gang war story do anything to convince you that this might be the one to pull it off?
I mean, pull it off. I mean, that's a loaded question to have. But I mean, like, yes, as you noted, this far and away has the most personal stakes. It's also like, I feel like definitely like the largest in scope, although if we go back to the 1980s and what we're going to be talking about in season 6 with that gang war, that at least that storyline ties in elements of Daredevil's Born Again, so it kind of feels very inclusive of Marvel as a whole. But you know, between all of the different mini-series and ongoings that are going to be impacted by this, you know, this definitely feels like the most ambitious gang war to date. And yet at the same time, I feel like, you know, I dare I say, this is like, I feel like the most Spider-Man centric event that has like real like Spider-Man stakes to it, probably since Spider Island, maybe, in terms of like how, like, even with all these other moving pieces, like at the core, it's a Spider-Man story, and that left me very excited for what's to come here. I mean, this is a big bombastic issue, and yet I never really felt at any point what the Spider-Man of it all got left behind. So with that in mind, I'm very excited about what this issue introduced.
I like you, agree. I think this is a really exciting start to an event, which is something, you know, you can roll the record back on you and I saying, what an exciting start to a storyline. You know, like they tend to fall apart not here, because we can get things rolling and then we have a hard time resolving it. Maybe that's the nature of sequential comics. But I thought this one was especially strong in that I have a very clear sense of what Spider-Man has to prove or go up against in this. What he needs to defeat, I don't really know. Like, this is a citywide problem. You know, it's not going to be like take down the big boss and the rest of it follows, is my imagination. Yeah. This is a multifaceted thing, and in my mind, that does a really great job of like selling all the other B titles, which you and I are going to be covering on the Substack, and I think have already gotten off to a great start. You know, and I really want to know all the facets of all the moving pieces. But secondarily to that, I actually think, you know, I think we thought that Dead Language was going to be the story that tied together what Wells is trying to do. And I think we both agree that as thrilling as that story was until the final chapter, it kind of didn't stick that landing. And to me, this feels like maybe it is a conclusion to the first chapter of Wells's ongoing story. Or maybe it's even like represents a pivot in his story away from what we were getting, which is to say depressed, helpless Spider-Man. Because up until now, like, you know, and through Dead Language, we've seen Spider-Man like wallowing in defeat, in misery at the loss of MJ and the loss of Kamala Khan, longtime Spider-Man supporting cast member. But here, like, the whole thesis of this issue is Robbie and Randy calling out Spider-Man and saying, like, prove to us why you're a hero. And Miles even gets to say that too. And I'm hoping that this gang war is going to be the test of Spider-Man's resolve as to, like, why he is worthy of being a hero. And as messy as the path to get here has been throughout the Zeb Wells run, and you and I have cataloged our thoughts up and down, etc., you know, and the emotional path hasn't always been easy to follow. I do feel like it seems to be the place where the pieces are snapping together, and we're going to get like some kind of emotional catharsis for Peter that hopefully launches us into the next stage. Did you feel any of that reading the book, or am I really just kind of in my, as the Twitter would say it, my Zeb Wells supporting haze?
Oh man,
as you will. Yeah.
you shilled that. No, I
Oh, yeah.
100% agree with that assessment. I mean, I feel like you know, again, the premise that was introduced here seemed very focused on Peter and Peter's journey in a way that we really haven't seen. I mean, you know, it's funny that we talk about like, well, you know, like Dead Languages kind of almost existing as like a bookend to the first part of the Zeb Wells run, because even though like that was like the story that they were technically building towards, like you said, like really, and this is probably the biggest criticism of that story that we could say. I mean, like we were almost building to get back to the beginning of the story, because we kind of start
Right.
where we start and then we end and we come back to it. You know what I mean? So this is truly, this storyline is truly the first step forward for Peter. Just even in terms of just logistical plotting. I'm very heartened by the fact that the creators at Zeb and Cody Ziglar here and his parts chose, you know, in doing that they were going to do it in a way where they really wanted to address some of the regression in the character that we've seen over the past year and change, and you know, they call him out for it, but you know, again, at least in the context of this comic, they're moving him forward, but they're also moving other things forward, not just related to Peter, but are adjacent to Peter. You know, in terms of the Janice Lincoln stuff. You know, there's a lot of like stuff within this here, and then of course you have this expansive, you know, territory battle with all these different gangs here, that, you know, is kind of the background color to all this. But like, you know, I feel like in terms of some of the core characters that we've been following all along over the last year and change, like it really seems like, and we'll see what happens, but like it really seems like there is a determination to start resolving these stories and setting these characters up in a situation where they can then move into another direction, and that's what you want to see in an event like this. We're, you know, like obviously we got several chapters ahead of us to see where landings are stuck or not, but like, you know, in terms of a setup, they seem very yeah, determined is the word I keep coming back to. They seem very determined to kind of like, I don't want to say address the criticisms of the book, but address where the characters have been, and find ways to move forward from them. And that's what you want in comics, you know, like, oh, we want growth. Well, we're getting growth. There you go.
Yeah, and sometimes that means having a regression, because like things have to revert to the mean at some point, whether you like it or not. What have you thought about the rollout of Gang War itself? I mean, one of my things I was worried about was how many players were involved.
Yeah.
Is this going to be very confusing? And I think here they provide some of the work. Like there's a map of territories. There's still people I don't know who they are, or I read Spider-Woman and realized that the character that looks like Blade in this is actually Diamondback. Yeah, you know, maybe some words on the page would have helped me out, but
Yeah.
like I did find it mostly coherent. What do you think about how this story? Because a lot of people are going to jump on here, right? Like, have they had a nice rollout inside this issue?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that they laid this out. I mean, it could have been laid out a little better, I guess, visually and even with some text. But like, I you know, I think for the most part, there was some clarity here in terms of what's happening. You know, like, you know, again, there is going to be some element of, I think the B stories and mini series are going to add color in a way that, not that you're going to be deprived if you don't read them, but I think like it's going to help. And I felt the same way about Spider Island. That was always kind of like my both like kind of the blessing and curse of Spider Island is I actually felt most of the tie-ins for that book were very good. Even if, and they weren't necessarily necessary, but like it helped to read them and they were enjoyable to
Yeah.
read. So what's the harm? And like that's kind of been my impression so far with the tie-ins we got on this. But yeah, yes, the map was a great touch. Yeah, there's no, what's the harm in adding some additional captions? I know they kind of got into like why Shang-Chi is there, but it was still very kind of like off-putting to be like, wait, what does he do? Like, what territory does he run? Aren't you a hero? Whatever. But I did joke about it in the recap, but and this is not a gang thing necessarily, but so Miles has an energy sword now. Like, what's this? Whatever.
That's a big part of his title.
Okay.
It's been on the cover of several of his issues, Mark.
Okay, I read his book.
Me calling you out here.
Okay, well, like Miles to Peter. I mean, like like sometimes I just kind of gloss. I guess I move too quickly on those comics. Anyway,
well, in regards to Shang-Chi, like let me give a shout out to Gene Luen Yang's excellent Shang-Chi miniseries that he did. He did a couple miniseries over the past few years, and he's an amazing writer. He did books like Dragon Hoops. I really love and would really recommend. As well as now he's got the American Born Chinese, which was adapted into a show. He's an amazing writer, and he did a great Shang-Chi number of miniseries, and that explains Shang-Chi's kind of more criminal element stuff. So yeah, they could have, or at least said, hey, go check out those miniseries. So let me be the one that does that because they're excellent, and I highly recommend them.
Excellent. But yeah, and again, I referred to this when we were talking about kind of our overall thoughts, but like, I also liked, in addition to Peter being at the center of this, the how central Janice and Randy were to this. I mean, like I joked about it in the recap, Randy kind of going on and on about, yeah, remember our wedding where all of your mobster friends showed up and ruined it, but hey, you got to pay that lip service to kind of, get those new readers on boarded in terms of what's happening here. Like the whole pairing off of Janice and Randy from the get-go, probably had its criticisms, and those criticisms might have been warranted, but I feel like they're using the emotional energy of that well here, and like the scenes involving them were really well done. They were some of the more powerful scenes of this comic.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And in regards to the gang war, like I think the scope of it is really well laid out here too. Those final pages where we see the double page spreads of the gangs rushing towards each other as Madame Mask is laying out her grand plan. One, they're visually really exciting, and it's cool to see like this kind of scale in a Spider-Man comic, which doesn't often, well, it used to not often get to this level of scale. So I think that was really exciting, and also like I just think it's doing an even better job of slowly, like now that like Hammerhead is seemingly eliminated, it's like we are really limiting the players in this, fairly quickly, so that I know who I'm rooting for and against, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let's talk about the heroes. So Peter and Miles take down Slide, a favorite of ours, and in what may be an early tag for Spectacular Spider-Man. Funny that they announced that book and then we got this scene.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was a plan regarding that, but it felt kind of impactful. What did you think of this scene between Peter and Miles?
I thought this was great, and I also, similar to the announcement of Spectacular Spider-Man, I also felt like there was an element of like, what took you so long to have this moment? Like, I mean, and you could say that in a lot of instances in this comic, frankly. Like, oh, like I've wanted to see some of these interactions for a while now, but I felt the Peters and Miles stuff. I mean, this was a far more impactful interaction between these characters that we have gotten in I might suffice to say, since the Bendis Spider-Man crossover. I don't even know when we've really gotten a meaningful interaction between these two characters. I mean, it kind of goes when we were talking about Spectacular Spider-Man in our Substack conversation, Dan. I mean, it kind of gets to the heart of what we were talking about there, which is like, this is a great concept, but if we're going to just do it the way Marvel has kind of been treating these characters in the comics so far, is it going to have any substance to it? And here is your substance. So, you know, you can maybe pick nits with the fact that they're kind of like inserting the drama in it now, like in the 11th hour, or maybe it's the 13th hour at this point. But at the same time, like this, it's not like it's not there and for the waiting there. I mean, like Peter has failed Miles, whether Peter, you know, that's the fault of Marvel or that's the fault of Peter. We could just, you know, we could have that conversation. But at the same time, like it was very affirming to have Miles call Peter out for that and do it, I think, in a both way that is appropriate to the character, but also just appropriate overall.
I mean, you said it all. I think Miles finally expresses something that readers have felt for years, which is like, why aren't these two together all the time? You know, I do think it's a little bit awkward or maybe let down by the fact that like Miles couches it in Peter's absence for the past 6 months, you know, right, being that he was like depressed about MJ, because really it's been much longer than that. You know, sure. Like, yeah, it's been since Miles was introduced in this universe, Peter has like not even ignored him, but like outright put him down. And yeah, there are moments like, you know, to give Zeb Wells credit, like issue 10, I think it was, or issue 9, the one with the, you know, the tie into the Grand Avengers Inheritors thing. Not Inheritors. What am I trying to say?
Oh, the Eternals.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that arc had like a nice moment where Peter checked in on Miles and there was a semblance of team upping going on there. But I mean, yeah, it's more just like, man, I wish they were just more flat out like, why have you never cared about me ever? But, you know, maybe that would be a little too brutal. And Zeb uses it, I think, like that metatextual thing to reinforce his own kind of the emotional journey of Peter, which I'll admit I'm kind of like, let's keep, like, I'm glad this gang war thing here is to move that story on, because like depressed moping Peter about MJ, I'm like, can we be done? You know, like, yeah. And maybe that was what the moment in, you know, Spidey's first hunt was about, was like him finally getting like forgiven by MJ in that scene. So yeah, I mean, like, I just thought the scene really worked, and I'm probably bringing too much baggage from the real world into my reading of it, but I did really appreciate it. And I laughed at the dang so you can do a sword now line, which I'm sure must have hit even harder for you, given you weren't aware of it.
Hey, okay, we're not talking about me here, Dan, okay?
Okay, fair enough. All right. You were mentioning... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the other thing I want to talk about with this scene here, though, and I feel like is this another example of Marvel listening to our show, Dan, or maybe it's our text messages. I'm trying to remember, but I feel like maybe it was earlier in our season 6 episode when we talked about villains with the Hines brothers, like Slide would be a great like intro villain to a, you know, kind of a sidebar villain to bring into, you know, very Ditko-esque villain, and that's what we got here. So, you know, like, you know, I don't know, like, as Spider Talk goes, so does the Marvel universe.
I mean, you say that, but also in Superior Spider-Man Returns, he had a big, you know, role in that. We watched Superior take him down. You know, so Slide's getting a bit of a resurgence here. Look, I'm not going to take credit for anything, but if our show did help foreground Slide, you know what? There's a gift, Marvel. Take it for free.
There you go.
Mark, you were saying that you really loved the Janice and Randy inclusion in this, and it got really emotional. Do you want to talk about what made those scenes work so well for you?
Yeah, I mean, like, we really haven't dealt too much with these characters, obviously, since the wedding issue, which of course was kind of the precursor to everything that's going on here. And look, like we've kind of talked about this in dribs and drabs over the past couple of years on this show, but like there was a part of me that's always kind of viewed this relationship as being more of kind of a sight gag, if you will, or just like, drama for drama's sake. Like, oh, of course, Peter's friend slash roommate is dating a supervillain. And of course, the supervillain is the daughter of Randy's father's kind of, childhood tormentor and, it was very on the nose in terms of like the drama here. So when even in the wedding issue, which I thought we very much enjoyed it, I very much enjoyed it, but like, like it was kind of like, all right, well, we've gotten to the inevitable conclusion of this relationship was kind of my view on this. And, when Janice kind of introduces the idea in this comic that she's going to take care of Randy, I didn't necessarily believe that. Like I was like, oh, well, that's, they're not going to go down that road because that would be, I don't know. I feel like that would just be too dark. But then like the way they kind of pivoted and, had Randy, demonstrate a real sacrifice with Lookout, we joke about Lookout, but like, he sacrifices himself for Janice there. And like, I mean, everything about what we've got between these two characters, in this issue was like emotionally miles ahead of anything we got prior to this, and like it actually like sold real stakes to their relationship, and brought real drama to that in a way that isn't kind of corny, like on the nose drama, and like now like has kind of left me in a place where, obviously I want to see Randy pull through. Like it's kind of like not to jump ahead, but there's a part of me that's like, well, if they wanted Randy to die, they probably would have just killed him off here, but maybe not. They could, he could still live for a couple issues and then die. We don't know, but like either way, like provided he survives this storyline, now I'm in a place where I'm kind of rooting for the two of them again, in a way that I don't think I was rooting for them before. Like I'm like, oh wow, like there does seem to be love and care and emotion there in a way that I didn't think was necessarily apparent prior to that. And it brought real depth to the characters that I think is really necessary here to kind of move the needle on all of these different subplots here. So I again, like I just thought this was just excellently executed in terms of characterization in a way that was desperately needed for the two of them.
I agree with everything you said. I do think, like, in terms of the jokiness of it, I still, at this point, want to know more about Janice Lincoln and what her motivations are. Like, dating, like, Randy is, like, an interesting thing given that, like, they're so clearly couched as, like, good guy, bad guy, and like what's it like to date a villain? But like if you're a villain, you don't see yourself as a villain. Although right. I don't know, Janice seems to like enjoy reveling in being a villain, and so like dating Randy seems very much like outside of that. And so I would still love to get more information about what it is that she sees and draws her to Randy more specifically, because I don't know that we've really gotten that completely. But I think the thing that was demonstrated here, and you pointed it out, is just how much Randy does have love for her. And the line that she says, I'm you. Are you judging me because I'm a villain? And he rejoins by saying like, no, I don't see you as a villain, but I bet whoever sent you does. Is excellent. Even if that's ultimately not true, like Hammerhead knew she wasn't going to kill Randy. But I think that line like is potentially like devastating to Janice's worldview. Yeah. Because who is she allowing to shape her character? And so I thought that was tremendous. And look, my lookout jokes aside, when he said look out and jumped, my heart leapt out of my chest for Randy. Like, I thought that was it. Like, he's done, you know? And the scene with him on the gurney with her chasing, and then like Robbie telling her off, like, get out of here, you don't deserve to be around my son, and her crying and running away is devastating. Now, what Janice chooses to do with that, like being both embraced by Randy but rejected by Robbie, will be interesting, and I think will likely come to the heart of the story. And I agree with you. I really want them to get together. Like, and you know, this is probably going to be a Romeo and Juliet, Capulets and etc.
Montagues.
Montagues. There you go. I just saw that show a couple weeks ago. I don't know why I'm forgetting the Montagues, but
no worries.
Yeah, I loved all of this, and the Montagues are not Miles with an energy sword, like, because clearly I remember that.
You knew I was going to say it. Look at that. He read my mind, folks, on the air. My goodness. I was just going to say to your point about Janice and like what are her motivations. I feel like we even got growth within this comic here with her, because I kind of felt like in the beginning of this story, she's kind of cosplaying as, like, you know, the mafia princess, if you will, you know, like she's coming in, she's sitting in her father's chair. And, you know, by the end of it, when she has that scene with Madame Mask, after basically, you know, she had Randy taken from her, you know, her life has been turned upside down, and like, I don't know, like maybe this is me overreading or over trusting a fictional character, but like when she's like, you know, if someone comes for Harlem, I'm going to destroy them. Like like to me, like that scene was like her growth, where like she went from being like, you know, kind of someone cosplaying as a mobster to being like, no, like this is personal now. Like, I need to defend this. Like, you know, you came from my father, you came from my fiance, you're coming for me. Like I'm growing into this. I mean, you know, does she see herself the villain? Does she see? I don't know, but like, I was very impressed with that trajectory with Janice there, because it kind of showed me a side to her, a depth to her that I have not seen in any comics outside of maybe the Spencer Superior run, which was usually just played for laughs anyway. But like, you know, like it was a big leap for that character, and I was glad we got that there to kind of set up where she goes next.
I mean, just reflecting on Janice, like a character invented in Superior Foes of Spider-Man, where it was mostly a joke. Not that the characters weren't real characters, but like, you know, like she didn't appear there first, but she first became really a character there. Right. And what a trajectory she's had to become like a really like substantial part of the Spider-Man supporting cast. I think she's like one of these rare like versions of like a real success story. To think that she's outlived Boomerang even is kind of surprising. So, but I think this story really will really rely a lot on like the emotional place that Janice lands in. I think will be like, if I had to imagine what like Spider-Man's quest for this will be, my guess is that it relies a lot on the redemption of Janice Lincoln and saving her from her worst impulses in this comic, and doing so like redeem Randy's story in some way as it's put in this comic. So I'm excited to see where that goes. I think this is a really exciting start on that front. But Mark, if people wanted to talk about this comic and more Spider-Man stuff, where might they go?
Well, Dan, I would say hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and much, much more. Dan, what is happening in the Slack this week?
Well, keeping it simple, Mark, we've actually had a great conversation going in the Slack about our introduction to Spider-Man comics, and kind of just trying to figure out, like, we have all these people in the Slack. We have almost 600 people in there now, and everyone has a different place where they entered the series. And I think we've had a fun discussion about how that shaped our different perspectives on the character. We've got a lot of very young people in there, early 20s, that are really like in love with the modern era of Spider-Man comics, and we've got old veterans like you and I that have been in it, for before they were even born. So it's been an interesting thing to kind of see where everybody comes from and how that changes how they approach things. So anyway, come and join in the fun. Come join our amazing Spider Slack. There's a link in the description to this episode. You can click on it. In less than a minute, you can sign up and join in on the conversation. We would love to have you all.
Awesome, Dan. Well, why don't we talk a little bit about the art on this book? Joey Vazquez did the pencils here. I will just say kind of in general, I didn't necessarily dislike the art, but like I also kind of was like, like this is, I understand that there are obvious reasons, and like JR has obviously been kind of furiously working away on his ASM issues. I'm sure that we've already seen some of the covers for them. I'm sure they're going to be awesome when they come out. But man, like this is the kind of story that just had like John Romita Jr. sensibilities written all over it, and that's not what we got here. This was a completely different style and tone of art than that. Like this was almost Ed McGuinness-esque, maybe not quite as cartoony, but like I don't know if it was the true feel that we needed here, but you have I feel like you have a keener eye for this, so I'm curious what your take on the art was.
I've actually been watching Joey Vazquez's career on Twitter for quite a while. There's a lot of interaction between him and Nick Lowe, and he kind of started as like a products artist for Marvel, and I think you can see why in the work. Like his dramatic poses of Spider-Man are very attractive. There's that like final page of Spider-Man swinging off to get a team, which I think is really striking. I mean, even more so than the image from Gleason of Spider-Man swinging with the sun behind him, which I thought was like a rare fail from Gleason. Like you get a strong version of that here. And I think Joey Vazquez's superheroes are really awesome looking. And actually, he's someone I've wanted to commission art from for a long time. But you're right. I think tonally, as exciting as it was to see like someone that Nick Lowe had been keeping an eye on get like a tryout book basically in the pages of Spider-Man, and he has done some backups before, but this is like a big meaty book. I feel like he was kind of underserved by being put on this material. Like his thin lines and attractive character work is not the kind of like gritty if I could think of an artist to do this book, I would love to. Yeah, J.R. Jarrow would be great. Like, I know Alex Maleev isn't really like on pull here, but like, man, we've had some. I mean, even get Juan Ferreira off of Sinister Spider-Man and let him do some of the more like weighty, inky, painterly stuff on this. I think it would have brought a completely different feel to this title. That, and I think it shows up like watching Tombstone get beaten over the head and have like blood blast out of his nose like it's a manga. Like I think that can work, but I don't think that that's the tone of this book. And like again, I think Joey's a really talented guy. I think his layouts work and are creative, and I think he's got some attractive stuff. I'd love to see him on a great lower stakes younger title than this. But I don't think he's ready for this particular tone of ASM.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed with you on that. Hey, so let's talk about that Madame Mask twist, a.k.a., we joke about Look Out, but, this is something we've really been kind of like, the calls coming from inside the house. We've been saying this for several weeks, months now even. We knew when Madame Mask was killed in ASM 31 that probably was not going to be the end of her story. So with that said, was was this the payout, the payoff that you were expecting in terms of how it was revealed, or how effective do you think this swerve was here?
I think it's fairly effective. I think, for the most part, I would imagine most people not listening to the show probably didn't see this coming. I do think it telegraphed itself a bit much with the random girlfriend hanging around. But if you're not clocking this stuff, I could see you missing it. And I didn't know for a fact that the girlfriend was Madame Mask, but it seemed if she wasn't, she was another player. And so it was either Tombstone was doing, or not Tombstone, Hammerhead. I know I said Tombstone last episode every time I meant to say Hammerhead. I don't know why. It's the double nouns names, But anyway, Hammerhead, it was either Hammerhead was being false or this person was being false. And it just turned out to be that Madame Mask had a body double and let her die off, which, fun job.
I mean, this is definitely one of those swerves. No, I didn't predict it quite to the degree that it was here. I knew something was up, but this is one of those swerves, I think, where the more you kind of, game it out in your head, the more problematic it becomes in terms of what she bore witness to and played along with, and I don't know.
Is she sleeping with
I don't know.
Hammerhead?
This is quite the long game, I would say, in a way that I don't think is really behooves anybody. And the thing that is worth noting here, there is a quality, and correct me if I I'm under reading something here, Dan, but it's we get this reveal with Mask, and yes, I did find the brutality of her attack on Hammerhead to be at the very least satisfying. You know what I mean?
I mean, we probably see Hammerhead at his worst he's ever appeared on page right before she bashes him over the head.
Yeah, so I'm all for that in terms of an outcome in this comic, but it does kind of beg the question of so what does she want? What is if you go back to what she just wants, is she just want chaos? I mean, is she wants to watch the world burn? I mean, which is fine, I guess, but I don't know. We obviously have several issues to learn. But there was a part of me here where I think to really sell the swerve here, I would have wanted a little bit more so why? So why'd you do all this?
I think for me, the problem is it doesn't really change the status quo. It's there was one puppet master and now there's another puppet master, you know? And she says explicitly here that she's going to let them Tombstone's death will undo all the deals that he established.
Hammerhead.
And will trigger. Hammerhead. Doing it again. Hammerhead's death will trigger all these deals that he brokered to in the previous issue to be undone and therefore spark a gang war, which we see. So I think that's what she's going for. And she says once they all destroy each other, I'll be there to pick up the pieces, basically. Right. So I get it, but it's so early on, it feels we didn't even get started and there's a pivot already happening. And then I think the other thing that undermines it a little bit is that Madame Mask is not a Spider-Man villain predominantly. And imagine if this was flipped and it was Hammerhead we thought was dead, and then he comes back and kills the person and he's behind it. I think we would be oh, cool. Hammerhead's finally getting his moment. Whereas Madame Mask is an Iron Man villain. So, and that's to say, I don't even know enough about Madame Mask to know oh, wait, she looked normal with her mask off. I thought she was hideously disfigured under there. So, maybe I'm just not up on my Madame Mask enough, but that's the only thing that keeps me from going hurrah! That's not a villain I typically associate with Spidey. So
maybe she has an energy sword too, Dan, that you're not aware of.
Sure, she could. She could very well.
You never know. All right. Well, I don't have anything to add about Madame Mask, but I do want to talk a bit about that Peter and Robbie scene towards the end of this comic here. I believe in the days following the release of this comic, I texted you about this, and among my words were, "This is one of my favorite things I have seen in a Spider-Man comic in quite some time." I don't know. Like, how about you talk about it first, and then I can kind of chime in here, because like I just found this to be incredibly effective, incredibly emotional, and kind of, capturing history in terms of characters and dynamics, and kind of, subtext in things in a way that, like, I don't know. This is high storytelling, in my opinion, this scene here. But what were your thoughts on it?
I think the only way to elevate this moment beyond what it is to have like Robbie address Peter Parker in the Spider-Man costume. Like, that's the only way it could get more elevated, which is like, Robbie over the body of his dying son, like imploring Spider-Man, like, this kind of happened because of you. Go prove yourself. And like I said earlier, I think this scene is the reason Gang War exists, like, as a story. Like, I think this is the heart of the story. Is Spider-Man is like, okay, I got to prove that I'm back in the game, and I am going to make a case for why vigilantism should even be allowed in the Marvel universe, right? Like, and like that heroes have a place in society, and that like people should stick their neck out like Randy, to get in harm's way. And who better to deliver that message than Robbie, who has had very many sincere conversations with Spider-Man over the years.
Yeah, I mean, part of what really elevated this whole thing to me, I mean, yes, like you said, like having Robbie actually address Spider-Man as Peter would have been something here. I mean, if you were gonna cash in that chip, this might have been the place to do it. We've been kind of
someone's
speculating.
going to eventually, I would think, but
but like, this is one of those scenes. I feel like, we talk about all the time on this show, Dan, the quality of Spider-Man's supporting cast. I mean, I would say it's the best supporting cast in comics. Maybe Batman fans would disagree with me, but whatever. This isn't a Batman show. And like, we have not gotten a ton of Spider-Man Robbie interactions in recent years, but like there is a history to these characters, and sometimes, like, I think as a creator, like, you just need to let the history do the work for you, and that's what they do here. Like, this is definitely a less is more thing. I mean, like, yes, Robbie's message is highly emotional and very charged and very direct to Peter, but like, it's not, he's not sitting there like blaming, like, you did this, you terrible man, like, it's not over the top in terms of its accusations. It's, you don't get to say this, and like that it's just a simple statement, and it's pushing so much forward in this scene. Like, I like, as a writer, like, everything about this scene was just so enchanting to me. I mean, like, even Robbie's whole monologue, like, yes, this is a tragedy, but it's also a story. The metatextual nature of that statement. Yes, this is the story. This is the story that you're all reading right now. This is Gang War. Like, this is the Gang War. But like, it's just letting the simplicity of who these characters are and who they've been for the last 50, 60 years, whatever the cases may be, letting that push the drama forward, and letting that do the work without over embellishing or over supplementing it with too much modern nonsense, if you will. Like, it's just great. Like, I don't know, I'm gonna remember this interaction between these two characters, for the rest of the time that I read this book, because I feel like it's that good in terms of Peter and Robbie stuff. Like I cannot think of as good of a moment in recent memory between these two characters. This is akin to, the Stan Lee, Romita era in terms of how these characters have interacted with each other. And I just applaud it. Like, I think this is just wonderful comic book storytelling right here.
And then just the pacing of it, that the scene ends with a giant, like, boom.
Explosion,
which,
yeah.
Like, I love Joe Caramanga's work, but, like, anytime we can get an artist incorporating the lettering into the actual art, I think it's a lost art form in the pages of, like, Marvel and Big Two comics to really have the artist tackle, like, onomatopoeia sound lettering, because I think it can be really expressive, and here it is. And seeing the color palette change, like, Menyz remains an absolute chief,
Yeah.
like this dude is just amazing. Oh, sorry. This is Bryan Valenza, who also is amazing. Yeah. We are spoiled on colorists, I think, in the pages of Amazing Spider-Man. But, like, watching that scene turn from, like, cool to hot with the heat and Spider-Man leaping out the window. And I know it doesn't follow immediately to the end of the big splash at the end, but it might as well. Like, Spider-Man is now on a mission. He's going to build a team and do what he can. And, I mean, what an ending to a comic. But speaking of endings, it's the end of our conversation. Mark, do you want to give it a grade?
Yeah, I've given this book an A-. I really loved it. I think this is as good as an opening arc as we've gotten. Some of the things that we've talked about, both with the art and, some of the secondary characters and their motivations, brings it down ever so slightly for me. But, like, this is really good. Really good event storytelling here. Very happy with it.
Yeah, and even more fun, we don't have to wait very long for this event to really, like, kick off. Like, we're right at it again. Maybe it makes things difficult for Mark and I podcasting, but it's going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, no one cares about our woes. I'm right there with you. I've been saying A- in my head all week, and so I'm glad to hear we're on the same page. So, A- from me.
Excellent. Well, Dan, it's that time now, for good things to come to an end, including the show. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, as always, this podcast exists because of our listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, less than the cost of a new comic, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including the very reviews that you're listening to right now, the same week that the comics release, plus exclusive artwork and a ton of other bonuses. And a thank you to everyone who already supports us and the work that we do, but plus we wanted to extend a special thanks to our newest contributor, Austin Kemprowski.
Thanks, Austin. To download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like JMD, Tom DeFalco, Ron Friends, Mark Bagley, David Michelini, and many more, subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
Lastly, I don't want to forget to shout out the Amazing Spider Talk Substack. This week, we're going to be covering all of Gang War in our Substack, everything that's come out so far. So if you want to keep up with all of our thoughts on the ancillary titles, and things like that. Plus, Mark and I are going to be discussing picking up special books from Steve Ditko's personal collection. So if you want to keep up on our thoughts about the entire event, learn a little bit about these crazy new items we've gotten in our collection, that's the place to go. It's amazingspider.substack.com. So, Mark, until I recruit our editors, Rick and Alex, to become my body double and your body double in case someone rigs our podcast studio with a bomb, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment. Don't miss the next installment of The Amazing Spider Talk.
And that's not to give anyone any ideas. Please do not
Ew.
bomb our
Do
podcast
not-
studios.
Do not bomb my house. Sorry, I just knocked my camera over.
Yeah, the real lie there is that we have podcast studios.
Yeah, right. Baha.